Thank you. Thanks, Rory and Tom, Chris and Brian, and all of you who've gathered here today. I do give a few speeches on the subject, and I will continue to. But this is the definitive work. What Tom Harkin did at his committee is the definitive work on for-profit schools. And as he said, they don't deny it. They can't deny it. It's established. How can you blame most people across this country for not understanding this issue? If you said to people, what's the difference between a private university, a not-for-profit university, a public university, and a for-profit university, they'd say, I'm not sure. And if you ask people, well, when it comes to these for-profit schools, what attracted you to the schools? Advertising. Well, they advertised a lot. And plus, most families think, well, if I can get a Pell Grant and a government loan, this must be a good school, right? Mm-hmm. So many families move in that direction. And what about the students? Well, the students go along with their families, and they're also being motivated. Go to school, get a degree. How long have you heard that since you can remember? So all of the factors are moving families toward these schools that we know are inherently weak and can't provide the kind of education that students deserve. And now we've got to ask a very, very basic question. Faced with a monthly disclosure of scandals in this for-profit college and university industry, what are we going to do as a government to protect these families and protect these students? What are we going to do? That's why we're sending this letter to this administration. Set some rules, set some standards. Here's what we think will happen after they set the standards. Some 8,000 institutions across America are going to be reviewed on this whole question of gainful employment. We think 16% roughly are going to fail. They're not going to meet the test of gainful employment that we're pushing for. And we think of those 1,300 schools that will fail, 94% of them will be for-profit schools. Don't get me wrong, tests are being applied to everybody across the board, all schools. We're not just picking on one sector. But when it comes to the facts of the matter, this sector of higher education is disgraceful and scandalous. 4 major for-profit school corporations are under investigation today, and almost 25% of the attorneys general in the United States are investigating in their states at least one or more of these for-profit schools. The obvious question is, well, Congress, are you awake? Do you know what's going on? What are you going to do about it? And the answer is, the for-profit colleges and universities have friends in high places, even in Congress. And when I tried to address this issue in the Department of Defense bill, when there was clear exploitation of service members serving in the U.S. military, I ran into a buzzsaw in conference. There are certain leaders in the House that will not stand for any language relative to for-profit colleges and universities. So now we're turning to the administration, to the President, to Secretary Arne Duncan, to come to the rescue of these families and students. I want to tell you, we're taking this student loan issue across the country, and we should. It is a terrible challenge to working families. These families want their students to have a fair shot at affordable higher education. But as we address the issue of student loans, don't ignore the obvious. 46% of federal student loan defaults are coming from schools that educate 10% of the students. That is outrageous. And it's time for this administration to step up with strict standards and to protect these students and their families. Senator Chris Murphy is here to say a few words on the subject.